How exactly does one man break an entire nation's endless cycle of chaos, only to forge a ruthless, decades-long presidential monarchy? Well, today's explainer dives deep into a history defined by raw political survival, shadowy factional wars, and a cold, calculating patience that literally altered the Middle East forever. Let's get right into the 1970 Corrective movement and how it broke the coup cycle.
We're starting our investigation way up in the rural Latakia Mountains, confronting the ultimate psychological paradox. Think about it. How does a marginalized village boy, born into the Alawite minority, a community historically despised by the Sunni majority, somehow grow to completely subjugate his own nation? It's a real-life rags to absolute power story that just defies all odds.
And what's truly wild here is how he literally rewrote his own identity the second he stepped onto the public stage. He was born Hafez al-Assad, which translates to beast, but he drops that name right as he enters the military academy. He becomes al-Assad, the lion. Talk about a brilliant, highly calculated psychological rebranding for a young cadet stepping into the chaotic politics of a newly independent state.
Part 1. The Alawite Pilot's Ascent.
All right, flash forward to Cairo, Egypt. Assad volunteers for the Air Force and absolutely crushes it, passing out at the top of his class. He gets sent on flying courses to the Soviet Union and Egypt. But here's the twist. While in Cairo, heavily admiring the era's great Arab leader, Gamal Abdel Nasser, Assad completely transforms from a hotshot pilot into a hardcore conspirator. He and a tight-knit group of fellow minority officers start plotting to overthrow the Syrian government, a goal they pull off with shocking efficiency during the 1963 Ba'athist coup. Just look at the sheer instability of this era. Syria was completely defined by a relentless, violent cycle of coups and collapsed alliances. First, you've got the United Arab Republic experiment with Egypt in 1958, then a bitter, messy split just 3 years later in 1961. Next comes the Ba'ath coup of 1963, followed by another violent internal takeover in 1966 that finally brought the Alawites to supreme power. Literally a revolving door of regimes.
Part 2. The Factional Cold War.
So, the violence didn't just magically stop once the Ba'ath Party took the reins. A massive battle for absolute supremacy emerged between two incredibly powerful Alawite leaders. On one side, you've got the civil faction, led by Salah Jadid, and on the flip side, the military faction, led by Hafez al-Assad. And Assad was incredibly methodical. He started quietly building up this untouchable base of fiercely loyal military officers to counter and eventually crush Jadid's civilian political wing.
But then, absolute disaster strikes. It's 1967, and Assad is serving as defense minister. He presides over the catastrophic military loss of the Golan Heights to Israel. It was a humiliating, devastating defeat that fundamentally shifted his entire strategic outlook. But rather than destroying his career, it fueled his absolute, uncompromising drive to seize total control, making sure a vulnerability like that would never, ever happen again.
Part 3. The 1970 Corrective Movement. Despite that devastating military loss, Assad doesn't flinch. He uses that vast, shadowy network of loyal officers to orchestrate the ultimate climax of this internal war. It's late 1970, and Assad executes what he calls the Corrective Movement, basically a bloodless internal coup. Step 1. Monopolize military power. Step 2. Launch the movement. Step 3. Systematically eliminate all rivals, locking his main opponent Salah Jadid in prison for the rest of his natural life. And the final step? In 1971, Assad officially installs himself as president.
Now firmly entrenched as the absolute master of Damascus, Assad officially kills off Syria's era of endless coups. Declassified CIA intelligence makes it super clear. He didn't just take over the existing government. He built an entirely new, deeply authoritarian system from the ground up, designed specifically to ensure he could never, ever be overthrown.
Part 4. Building the Presidential Monarchy.
So, how exactly do you turn a country's social and political structure upside down to build what historians call a presidential monarchy? Well, his master plan was absolutely comprehensive. He secured power from every possible angle. He publicly funded Sunni religious institutions and mosques to co-opt the religious establishment while simultaneously forcing through secular Ba'athist policies. But his real trump card? He made sure that every single critical security and military apparatus was exclusively controlled by his fiercely loyal Alawite officers. And to top the whole shebang off, he built this intense, inescapable cult of personality.
To enforce complete psychological submission, the state just floods the country with this gritty, relentless propaganda.
They even weaponized religious iconography. We're talking posters depicting his mother with a literal halo and Assad bowing at her feet. It elevated his entire family to an almost divine, untouchable status, making any challenge to his rule feel like a direct challenge to heaven itself.
But of course, dissidents saw right through this secular nationalist facade. Listen to this quote from Druze leader Salim Hatem. "Sectarian spirit is spread in a shameful way in Syria. The filling of powerful places is limited to a specific class." They knew the truth. The state's actual power was being violently hoarded by a highly specific, sect-based elite.
And you know, that kind of tension, it just can't be contained forever. When opposition from the Sunni majority finally boils over into a full-scale armed uprising, the whole narrative violently shifts. The year is 1982. The location is the city of Hama. And this is where the regime deploys its absolute most extreme survival tactic.
The numbers here are just horrifying. 10,000 to 30,000 dead. The regime's elite defense companies, led by Assad's own brother, Rafat, essentially razed the entire city to the ground. It was a staggering, brutal slaughter explicitly designed to send a chilling message of absolute deterrence. The message was simple: if you rebel, we will literally destroy your entire city.
Part 5. The Legacy of Stability.
Tragically, the terror actually worked. This immense internal repression successfully paralyzed domestic threats for decades, and that allowed Assad to turn his focus outward, playing a massive, uncompromising game on the international stage. Declassified intel paints a picture of a man who masterfully used terror and proxy groups to strictly control the entire Middle Eastern strategic balance. He literally retained an almost single-handed ability to undermine or stall the Arab-Israeli peace process if it didn't perfectly serve his interests.
What's truly fascinating is how he actually viewed geopolitics. It was with this cold, terrifying patience. He once gave a speech noting that the Arabs struggled for 200 years before finally defeating the Crusades. 200 years! He seriously saw this as an eternally valid model for his own confrontation with the West and Israel.
In this detail perfectly captures his mindset. As the CIA directly noted, Assad is a patient man. For him, power was his only drug. He lived this remarkably dull, austere life. He had zero interest in luxuries or money or fancy palaces. He was simply willing to wait decades, sacrificing absolutely anything and anyone to achieve his geopolitical goals.
He died exactly as he ruled. On June 10, 2000, which ironically was the exact anniversary of the day he lost the Golan Heights 33 years prior, Assad was just sitting at his desk. He was on the telephone, actively managing Lebanese political affairs with the president of Lebanon, when he simply stopped speaking. He left behind an unbelievably elaborate, tightly controlled security state, literally handing the keys of this presidential monarchy directly to his son. So as we look back at the complex, blood-soaked history of the Corrective movement and the regime it birthed, we're left with a genuinely haunting question. What is the true generational cost of an enforced stability built entirely upon endless, iron-fisted repression? It's a heavy question, right? But it's one that completely defines the region to this very day. Thanks so much for joining me to explore this critical piece of history.